Come on, get up.
Morning, Brian.
Stephen, are you aware that you've voluntarily embarked upon a PhD in physics?
Hello.
Hello.
Science.
Art.
I'm a cosmologist.
What's that?
I study the marriage of space and time.
The perfect couple.
One never knows from where the next great leap forward is going to come, or from whom.
What if I reverse time to see what happened at the beginning of time itself?
Wind back the clock.
Wind back the clock?
Keep going.
I don't know how.
Yet.
Keep winding.
Where to?
It's called motor neuron disease. Life expectancy is 2 years.
I want us to be together for as long as we've got.
It'll affect everything.
You don't realize what lies ahead. This is going to be a very heavy defeat.
But I love him. And he loves me. We're going to fight this illness together. Good luck.
Why?
I'm okay.
So, this black hole at the beginning of time. Brilliant. Brilliant, Stephen. Well done, Doctor.
He has pneumonia. The only way he will survive will be to give him a tracheotomy. He will never speak again.
Yes, he will.
My name is Stephen Hawking.
It's American.
Is that a problem?
It has been a great joy to watch this man defy every expectation, both scientific and personal.
There should be no boundary to human endeavor. However bad life may seem, while there is life, there is hope.
Thank you.
Sorry, did you say something?
I said thank you.
Please welcome to stage Allison Bales, Eddie Redmayne, and Felicity Jones.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for turning out today. I am a long way away. When they said I was separate, I thought, we'd be playing footsie or something. I imagine that many of you here have seen the film, and that's probably, your interest is for why you're here. If you haven't seen the film, after this, you're going tonight, I'm sure. It's a fabulous film. I pretty much cried from start to finish, really. I mean, sorry. It was a good cry, though. It was a cathartic cry. When you make a film, do you cry when you watch it, or are you so unable to sort of get swept away because you know the minutiae of making it?
Hello everyone. I think that the first time you watch something, you're just seeing everything you did wrong, and you're criticizing yourself, and you're sort of going, oh, I wish I'd done that a bit differently, and you're quite critical of yourself the first time. So it's when you've seen the film a few times that you can start to get a little bit more objectivity on it and see it in its whole, and then you start to see all the wonderful moments of all the scenes that you weren't in, and the performances and the detail, but that takes a bit of time to get to that point.
It's interesting that you have an initial instinct when you read a script, and when I first read this script, it was incredibly moving. But then as you begin to prepare over the sort of 4 or 5 months into starting filming, you become so in this kind of, this sort of myopic tunnel of what your character's doing and what your sort of route through the story is, that what's extraordinary when you see the film for the first time is you forget that it's part of a much bigger story, and so I was really I was moved when I saw the film, because I was sort of stepping outside of it and seeing the whole canvas rather than just Stephen's way through it.
A lot of actors tell me that they're driven by fear when they choose projects. Something that really scares them, they're drawn towards. What was the level of fear like on this one?
immense. It was one of the most nerve-wracking experiences of both our lives. And the stakes do feel high when you're playing a real person, because that person is going to see the film eventually, and you feel, you want to get it right, and you want to get every detail in the right way, and it does up the stakes, definitely. And meeting Jane and Stephen was such a profound moment, because we'd already been working on the film for about 4 or 5 months doing our own prep, and we met them quite late on, so we were quite worried that we'd been preparing in the wrong direction. You sort of worry that you meet the real person and everything you thought was in the wrong direction, but actually meeting them, there was so much to be gained from them. They're really wonderful people, very witty and intelligent, and there were lots of details in physicality and nuance that we could then bring into the film.
Some actors choose not to meet the real life counterpart, however, for that reason, that it could throw you off, and meeting Stephen so close to when you started shooting, that to me seems very risky.
Yeah, do you know what? I mean, I'd wanted to meet Stephen earlier in the process, but firstly, he's a busy man solving some quite hardcore problems out there in the universe. But also, he was promoting a documentary that he had made called Hawking that was coming out, so he was very busy. And so there was that fear, exactly as Felicity was saying. What if all the work and the research you've done, you realize is wrong? We were very lucky that when I met Stephen, the overriding thing that I gleaned from him was this extraordinary. He sort of emanates humor and wit, and he has this. I describe it as like a Lord of Misrule quality, this extraordinary sense of mischief. And what was wonderful was, after having done all the research, which was all about his person, his work and the disease, was actually having those really tangible human characteristics that you could just then take into the playing of it just after we started. So it ended up being helpful, but yeah, always trepidation.
As your physicality declined in the course of the film, and you were less able to rely on your voice, on your facial movements, how did you get across that sense of mischief and humor?
Well, the first thing is that what's interesting is, as the disease takes hold of Stephen, he can move very few muscles when you meet him. But what's astounding is that he has perhaps the most charismatic or expressive face I've ever seen. It's just that it feels like all the facilities that we have in life of gesture and tone of voice and all of this sort of thing, all those energies are channeled into those few muscles that he can use. And the great thing for me playing him was that film captures that. Film can go so close that it can see all the minutiae. And so it was a lot of months of sitting with a sort of all of the documentary footage on a computer and in front of a mirror, and basically trying to replicate some of those expressions, but really trying to get a sense of his character, so it moved beyond just imitating.
We know Stephen Hawking. I mean, we know what he looks like, we know how his voice sounds, and it is his voice used in the film, which is incredible. So we all feel like we have a sense of who he is. But Jane, I don't think many people really would know anything about Jane. Does that make it easier for you because she's not so familiar to us?
It's that's a really good question. Does it make it easier? I think I wouldn't even see it in that term of how easy or hard it was. It was very much, when I read the script, I was struck by the phenomenal strength of this woman and her determination, and there was a ferocity to her. At such a young age, she was 18 when Stephen was diagnosed with the disease and only had 2 years to live. And some people might have run away from that and thought, that's I can't take that on. But she made a very clear-headed decision to continue with the relationship, and there was a profound love and that went through the 25 years. So it was always about just trying to get Jane's truth and her essence. And as Eddie said, you don't want to do an impersonation. It's trying to inhabit that person and get their qualities without it being sort of a sort of literal Madame Tussauds idea of someone.
She is an amazing woman, and I think that's what I came away from the film with, which is, wow. I mean, I have children. I know how hard it is to take care of children, and she's at one point taking care of her husband and 3 children. But you managed to not make her a martyr. She's a saintly woman, I think. How did you avoid sort of making her just too, annoyingly good?
Well, that was that's what I liked about the script. Often with more traditional biopics, the female character can just be, they're completely sort of one-dimensional, and there's not a lot for you to do. But what I loved is that it was exploring this woman who, she has 3 children, she is a carer, but she also has a strong sense of her own identity, her own career that she's pursuing, and she falls in love with another man. So there's this interesting, 3/4 of the way through the film, there's a very interesting, rather complicated love triangle between Jonathan, Jane, and Stephen, and I just found that fascinating. I hadn't come across that kind of story in a film before.
I love the fact that this is a film where the 2 leads, I mean, it is Stephen Hawking's story because he's the more celebrated of the couple, in the public eye, but the film is very well weighted between the 2, and you don't see that a lot, I think, in films.
Well, I hope so. I mean, what was, for both of us, what was amazing is when we read the script, I thought it was going to be a Stephen Hawking biopic, and what I read was this incredibly sort of beautiful but complicated love story, and it felt like really a scrutiny into love in all its guises. So whether it was young, passionate love, or for both of them, the love of their subject matter, the things they were interested in, but also family love and the boundaries, the failings of love, where the limitations of it. And so yeah, I never really, in some ways, it was actually, the film was based on Jane's book, so it's definitely sort of equally balanced, if not actually Jane's story.
I think some people feel that the love story maybe took over from his work in the film. I mean, there has been some criticism that it doesn't really, like anyone other than Stephen Hawking could possibly understand a film that explained his work. I personally was relieved as all that it touched on what his research, but we didn't have to get too bogged down in it because I wouldn't have been able to follow it. And I love the love story. But can you explain Interstellar to me, for instance?
Well,
haven't seen it yet, but I've heard it's a lovely companion piece. So.
It sort of is a good companion. I didn't want to bring it up, but it is. But I still don't understand what a wormhole is compared to a black hole, for instance. Well, I'm quite happy about that.
Yeah, good. Well, what was interesting, I think there was a sense that, firstly, there have been many documentaries made about Stephen and his work, and fantastic documentaries, including one that he made last year. So there was the question, what, if that's already been told, what story is there? And the answer was this was Jane's book, and it was a personal story, and it's a story about limitations and love, and but I think also what's complicated with Stephen's work is, there's not a sort of easy way to explain it. He didn't sort of discover the black hole. It's all the intricacies. It's Hawking radiation, and one needs a certain amount of knowledge before you can really see how extraordinary the things he achieved was. And for me, part of that preparation was, whilst trying to read and understand everything he had written, I would go onto the websites and I'd look at all these sort of complicated websites, and I'd go to this cracking website called astronomyforkids.org and try and sort of educate myself. So what was interesting is I think both Felicity and James, our director, we all studied art subjects, so we got the science to the level that we could sort of comprehend. And
we sort of have these discussions where we'd start talking about black holes, and then we'd sort of think that we'd worked it out, and then 5 minutes later you're trying to describe it to someone else and it's just gone. Like, no, this isn't working.
I totally get that. So on that note, though, when you're defending your thesis, or when you're sort of talking about the stuff that he wrote about, as an actor, if you memorize the lines and you say them with conviction, is that good enough? Because if you don't really understand the concepts...
Well, I definitely maybe belittled it too much in the sense that we absolutely had to educate ourselves to the point of being able to understand what we were talking about in the film. But one of the things I found interesting is there's one scene, for example, when Stephen's working something out on a chalkboard, and I'd memorized all the equations, but the way in which you approach the board is interesting. And after he was unable to move his fingers anymore and therefore write equations, he created this entirely new way of thinking, which he described as visualizing. So you're doing, because you can't work things out on the page, you're doing it in your mind and through symbols almost. And that became interesting to me because it was like I decided to sort of approach the chalkboard almost like a painting, in the same way that you would see things, this needs a bit more here and a bit more sort of there. So I tried to relate it to what I knew, but certainly we both had to understand what we were saying.
And they would often, Stephen and Jane would work together on, when Stephen couldn't use his hands anymore, Jane would type out his work and his theses. So we had to have a level of understanding in order to play that scene convincingly. Right. So it's important that you do grasp those ideas.
If you were to write a screenplay about two characters who meet at Cambridge University, and one was a scientist and one was an art student, and one was an atheist and one was a believer, I mean, you couldn't really have written anything that had better characters dramatically, don't you think? Yet it's true.
Well, that's what we loved about reading the script. You know, it is a relationship story. It is about two people falling in love, but it also has this macro element, and it's how do we navigate the world? Why are we here? And what is the meaning of our lives? And it's interesting that Stephen is trying to find that out through science, and Jane is trying to discover that through faith. But their endeavors are the same. They're aiming for the same thing, which is to understand the meaning of why we're here.
And Faith got Jane through the process.
Absolutely. She's in her book. Her faith was it gave her an enormous amount of strength. You know, it was that there were times, and it was very difficult for her. It was a lot of responsibility with children and care, and it was a place she actually loved singing, and that was a moment of just having a moment for self-expression and to help with the situation. But she was a strong believer.
The other lovely thing was how, like, as you say about finding such interesting characters, was that the more research you did, that their families were so wonderful as well. There's a wonderful thing about how Stephen's dad was a tropical medicine specialist, but he used to drive, their family car was like a London black cab, and then they would go on holiday to these gypsy, and apparently if you went round for lunch, which we reference in the film, if you went round for lunch with the Hawkings, like some of Stephen's siblings would just be sitting there reading books. They wouldn't talk. So there was such confidence in that family, in their sort of brains and their humour, that there was an eccentricity which was fun to play.
When Hawking is diagnosed, he's given a 2-year life sentence, and this sort of really motivates him to start working on something of groundbreaking importance. What motivates you two?
Oh, that's a big question for a Tuesday morning.
Right now, I'm just thinking about lunch.
Oh, God.
Well, what does the film say about motivation? It sort of puts us all to shame, I think, when you see what this man has done with his life.
Well, I definitely think there's something, what was wonderful to read about was someone as extraordinary as Stephen Hawking describing himself as being lazy. Like, he was lazy and complacent while he was at Oxford, and it was only when he was at Cambridge he was still struggling to find something to do. But he had great intellectual confidence, but it was this 2-year sentence that made him realize he had to, it galvanized him, and with Jane's help, really catalyzed him into work. I mean, I feel like what motivates me is being able to do that thing. I'm so aware of how lucky I am that I get to do something that I loved doing as a kid, and it never felt like there was a transition into doing something professionally, doing it as a job, and really just putting one foot in front of the other and being allowed to keep being paid to do what you love is what motivates me to tell stories.
Yeah, there was actually, when Stephen joined Facebook recently, someone asked him about, what's important, and he said, be curious. And I think that's what it's always about, is believing in something and constantly being enchanted by the world, I guess, without that sounding too... does that sound pretentious?
No, I think be curious is a very
Be curious. Good. It's such, keep finding and keep believing in something. It doesn't matter what it is, but as long as you care about it and you believe in it, that seems a good way of navigating your life.
I believe I'll have another drink, in the words of Red Skelton. When Suzanne introduced you, she mentioned the Oscars, and I saw you both sort of flinch. And it must be awful because they've got their lists out, and you guys are both on the lists. But, you know, we're still a long way away from the nominations even, so it's a lot of pressure. But I want to ask you, when I was growing up in England, I used to stay up really late at night to watch the Oscars, but it wasn't such a big thing in England, is it? Is that the same now? Is it a big deal? I mean, we have the BAFTAs.
Well, it's always on at a very weird hour, isn't it? I remember you sort of had to watch it on Sky Movies +3 at sort of
like
4 in the morning.
3 in the morning, yes.
It takes real dedication to what to
You were
actually
very
watch
committed.
it.
Yeah, I was, yes.
I think, I mean, definitely they have the BAFTAs, and I think there's, you know, it's always such an extraordinary thing. Those evenings are such, you know, they have such history and heritage that there's always a curiosity. No, but I think the hour makes it complicated for people in the UK to watch.
I mean, it's all very exciting. You know, we finished the film in, was it November, the end of November, and it's just wonderful that people are responding to it and enjoying it. You know, you make things and they don't always turn out how you expect. So I think we're just enjoying it, taking it day by day.
The director of this is James Marsh, who has made feature films, but he's probably best known for Project Nim and Man on Wire, about the guy that walked across the wires, the crazy film. The fact that he's so good at telling real-life stories, did that convince you that he was the correct director for the job?
Absolutely. We both were huge fans of Man on Wire. I don't know if people had seen that, and it was so sensitively told story about this extraordinary man, Philippe Petit, who was a tightrope walker and did this extraordinary walk. And so the way that James had handled that story and quite a complicated character, but done it with such sensitivity, it meant that, you know, you could see how well he would take hold of this story of theory. And also Andrea Riseborough was in Shadow Dancer, another film that James made, and seeing how sensitively he'd dealt with a female character meant, you know, gave me huge confidence in seeing his work.
And also, I mean, he was just the most wonderful man to work for, James, because he really he allows you great freedom whilst always making you feel safe. And on this film, for all of us, it felt like we were you know, taking a leap slightly into the unknown. We realised the stakes were high, and he always just kept sort of pushing us to be brave and to make mistakes and not worry if you make mistakes and they're disastrous, to keep trying new things. So he was a really formidable man to work for.
What's the best part of your job? Is it the research, when you get to delve into these wonderful, rich characters, or is it being on the set with the great camaraderie of a set, or is it the actual moment of performance?
I think a combination of all of those things, but there's something really exciting when you're sitting in the makeup trailer and putting on a wig and then putting on your costume and getting that opportunity to inhabit another person's life. That, I think that's when it's really exciting. Is, you know, it's a bit like Stars in Their Eyes. Or does that show exist here? It's a show in England where you get to dress up and perform as your favourite pop singer. So you can be like, you know,
why
Beyonce.
Is that not here yet?
Yeah, it's a great idea.
I don't think it's on in England anymore. I think it's stopped in the mid-'80s. We're betraying
That's when I was watching it.
Yeah, but Simon, what's his name? Simon Cowell. I'm surprised he hasn't brought that over yet.
It's a great idea. Do we get copyright?
We should do.
But there's that feeling of being able to transform into something else. That's what's exciting, I find.
For me, I remember I worked with an actor called Alfred Molina, who's one of the most wonderful people, and he always described, and I totally agree, that if life could just be the rehearsing, if our jobs could be the rehearsing part of it, it would just be heaven for me. I always find the second that you have to, I suppose you probably need one performance or going in front of the camera once to sort of, to galvanize you, but I just love the rehearsing part of it, where you feel free and you can mess around and doing all the research, and I always find when it actually comes down to doing the thing, it's a bit more stressful.
All right, we're going to open up the floor to the audience. There is a microphone coming. We'll start with you in the polka dots because you got your hand up really fast.
Hi, really excited to see the film. So this is like more of a question in terms of you guys as actors. So you've both played roles where you are in a part of a visceral love story, Felicity, you and Like Crazy, and Eddie, and you and Les Mis, and My Week with Marilyn. So my question would be, for both of you, what, if any, parts of those roles do you take and bring into your personal relationships?
Sorry. I mean, that's really interesting, but I think it's probably more the other way around. It's, you know, as actors, you can only draw from, you can do as much research as you want, but ultimately you can only draw from what you know. So I tend to, I think what I learnt from this story was more about living life fully, like being, you know, this. It's a very specific set of circumstances, this, in which Stephen and Jane and the family have limitations and obstacles put in their way, and yet they continue just to live every second fully and passionately. And that's what I've taken away from this. But generally, certainly in the love story elements, you try and bring what you've experienced and what you know.
Yeah, I'd say it's what's lovely when you play a character and you find things that you really admire in them, and there's sometimes things that you don't have yourself. And I think with this, it was this love, that the dedication of it, and that it wasn't a superficial sort of surface love. It had more depth than that, and how this couple constantly, they kept adapting in order to make their relationship survive. You know, and that's what you would want to take from it, is those qualities of even if things get hard, you believe in the other person and you love them, and you keep going.
Right, we have a question behind us.
So first of all, I wanted to say thank you for this film. I saw it on Sunday, and you guys have done a magical thing in bringing to the world a disease that is, I think, not very well known. And so for people or families who've been affected by motor neuron disease or other motor diseases like multiple sclerosis, it's an incredible gift. But I was really curious, Eddie, how you approached the physicality of the role, because the Eddie we're used to seeing, many of us, is, you know, Eddie and Burberry on the red carpet, right? And the transformation is so stark. But as an actor, when physicality can often overtake a role you play, how did you approach thinking about the character versus the physicality?
Do you know what? You felt so. We were both so aware of the stakes that actually it was about educating yourself from the word go. And what I did is there is no process with acting that I found one way that works, a method that really sort of. So what I try and do, and I think Felicity is the same, is we just try and immerse ourselves in a sort of three-dimensional way. And so on day one, went to a motor neuron disease clinic called the Queen Square Neurology Clinic in London. And there was a specialist there called Dr. Katie Seidel, who educated me. And I didn't know anything about motor neuron disease, also known as ALS. And what's extraordinary about this disease, it's been around for over 100 years. They're basically struggling to get any closer to finding a reason for it or cures. And that's a lot to do with funding. And that's why the Ice Bucket Challenge has been so brilliant. And I hope that this film will show the real ramifications of the disease on families. But so it was about meeting people who were suffering from ALS and their families, and they were so generous to us. But also seeing, so as well as being taught the specifics of the physicality, also learning about the emotional costs. And both Felicity and I went to meet carers and into the homes of some of these patients. But then as far as the character was concerned, that was about reading, watching as many documentaries as I could, in which you really get a sense of Stephen's character, and then meeting him. And as I was saying before, that last element of his humor and wit, and how expressive his eyebrows are, and these muscles that he can barely move.
His grin, he has this amazing smile. His whole face lights up.
And it's the most warming thing in the world. When Stephen smiles, you feel like the world is a greater place. So I had a lot of pressure on a smile, basically. Was
it physically challenging though for you, because you're contorting your body in such a way that it looked very uncomfortable?
It was a challenge, but because I knew, I had these months to prepare. I worked with a dancer, a woman called Alex Reynolds, and she started basically helping me train my muscles to be able to shorten and to sustain these physicalities for long periods. And I started going to an osteopath, a sort of chiropractor, from the word go in rehearsals, so he would track how the body was shifting and changing, and it was intense, but at the same point, every day at the end of the day, you could get up and go home. And so many of the people we met couldn't. And so there was this other thing that underpinned both of us while we were making the film, was just how lucky we were, and not to take that for granted.
You catch yourself sort of moaning, and then you'd think, oh my God, we're just doing this for sort of 12 hours in the day, and Jane and Stephen were going through this every single day, 24 hours a day, and it did, it just made you stop and think.
I remember we did this one scene which isn't in the film in the end, in which Jane helps Stephen into the car, and we were trying to work out how we would do it from the wheelchair into the car, and I remember we were both so frustrated because Felicity would be like, no, you can't help me, because I was trying to help by moving things, but the cost was physically so hardcore on you, let alone what it must have been on Jane.
Yeah, so I suddenly realised I had to start going to the gym, which I hate doing, and started working out, because there's a physical demands as well as the emotional demands of caring for someone. But she's a tough lady, lifting someone and taking the chair. But we would try and do it in a way that I guess in some ways it was quite method, that we would play the reality of that situation where, so I was like, no, give me your full weight. Come on, Eddie, full weight. Let's do this properly rather than faking it.
Right. Hi. Thank you so much for coming. Absolutely love the movie. Cried all the way through it. I still cry whenever I see the trailer. So thank you for that. This is obviously a big movie. I wonder how this will change your career in the future. There are lots of talk about the Oscars, and if you do get Oscars, fingers crossed, how this will affect your decisions choosing movies after, and where do you see your career going after this?
There's one thing I've learned is that there is never a crystal ball, and it's so, no matter, you might have all these plans, but especially being an actor, you never know what's going to happen, or what script you might get, or so that it's sort of, people say, oh, what are your choices, and you sort of think, oh, choices, it's not really quite like that. It's that things come through to you, and you hopefully have a response to them, and it's more, do they want you for the job rather than rather than the other way around. So the thing is, I think, is you just don't know, and you just hope to make interesting stories and play interesting characters, and I think would always be my motivation, but things never quite work out how you expect.
But also, whatever, if you ever want to push outside your own box, as it were, and to do something new, you always have to chase for it. So whatever you've done, you need to stop proving to people that you can do something different. So I don't think, Felicity's absolutely right. We love this sort of idea of having choice, but realistically, it's not quite like that. But hopefully, if you always just keep pushing your own boundaries, then it will make interesting work.
We have a question down front.
We have time for one more question. Hi, I'm just wondering, I saw you both in an interview where I think you said that during different parts of the day, you would have to jump from Stephen when he was young and then Stephen when he was older, and I know that you had to do that both as Jane too. So I was wondering, how did that work out when it's like different parts of life? And
that was one of the tougher things, because when you're shooting a film, you have to shoot all of the scenes in one location at that time, and particularly when you're shooting in Cambridge University, it's quite difficult to get them to shut down Cambridge University for a day or two. So our director James really did try to see if we could shoot the film chronologically, but it didn't work like that. So part of the preparation was not just playing the characters at the different ages, but was also how to be able to really access those different ages quite easily and quite freely. And for me, that was about trying to learn all of the moments in the different stages of Stephen's physicality, having them so embedded in my body that by the time we started playing, they were secondary and we could just play the emotional part of the story. And really what that took was time, and we had time on this.
Yeah, it's interesting with any character, you approach it, you want to have the emotional journey of that character, but then also the physical journey, and obviously they were completely different demands for us, but that physicality is something that you want to put in place really early on in rehearsal, so it's not something you're thinking about when you come to sets, because on the set, as Eddie said, you're just playing the emotional beats of the story and playing the love story rather than thinking too much about, where your hand is or the walk of the character or how they sit. That's something you want to do in your that's your homework. That's what you do before you get to set.
And the other thing is that Stephen, for him, the disease is so secondary. He, since he's been diagnosed, he has never looked back. He has always looked forward. And and for Jane similarly. And what we wanted to make sure was the story. This is not a piece about ALS or motor neuron disease. It's a story about two people.
Thank you, everyone, for coming here today. Thank you for the great questions. Eddie Redmayne, Felicity Jones, thank you very much, and best of luck with the film.
Thank you very much. Thanks.